Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome at the closing session of the 11th World Science Forum here in the upper house hall of the Hungarian Parliament building in Budapest, Hungary. It is my great pleasure to welcome you. My name is Balázs Gulyás. I am the president of the Hungarian Research Network, HUNREN, and I am one of those who some 20 years ago dreamed about the creation of a series of discussion meetings similar to the Davos meeting, the World Economic Meeting at Davos, in the field of science, research and innovation. I will be the chair of this closing session, and it is my pleasure to open this closing session, and as the first agenda point of the session, I would like to ask Professor Balázs Hankó, Minister of Culture and Innovation, to address you.
Dear Honorable President, dear President, distinguished guests, dear colleagues. It is a great honor for me as representative of Hungary to welcome the participants of the World Science Forum in this Hungarian Parliament, which is one of our historical buildings. I believe this symbolic location perfectly reflects the purpose of the forum. Hungary is fortunate that people here have always had a strong interest in the latest scientific achievements. Many attend science events like the Night of Researchers and the Hungarian Festival of Science in every November. Just last night, the Science Expo side event of the World Science Forum was a huge success. We believed the forum would be a great opportunity to show the latest scientific trends in Hungary and around the world, as well as the research of the top institutions and universities. In Hungary, dignity in our scientists and inventors is a part of our national identity. Just to name a few, think of Ernőd Rubik cube, or the 2023 Nobel Prize of Katalin Karikó and Ferenc Krausz. And we rank 11th Nobel Prize per capita all over the world. I firmly believe that Hungary is one of the best places in the world to organize great international scientific meetings, and I am pleased that I can greet such a large number of participants today. But I assure you that Hungary is not only one of the best places in the world to organize great international scientific meetings, but also an excellent place to conduct scientific research. Hungary has created a model to show our commitment to increasing research and development. In the last 10 years, we have tripled our research development funding. The number of researchers and developers in Hungary has more than doubled since 2010. We have also seen a significant rise in the number of PhD students. In just 5 years, we nearly doubled the number of students in doctoral programs, with today 30 percentage point being international students compared to 7% a decade ago. Hungary has created a model to support research, development, and innovation activities made up of 5 key elements. First, Hungary provides a business-friendly environment with incentives to encourage research, development, and innovation, including the EU's lowest corporate tax rate of 9% and tax benefits for research and development, investment and hiring. The government has set up a National Research Development Fund which grows each year to support research and innovation nationwide. Hungary's successful foreign investment policy has attracted major companies from Europe, the US, and of course East Asia, boosting collaboration between academia and industry. Other important initiatives include university reforms, cooperative PhD program, and grants for joint research development projects. Hungary also supports the growth of science parks and technological transfer companies to promote innovation. Defining focus areas, focusing on areas like digitalization, green transition, healthy living, and security to strengthen its high-tech industries. These achievements and actions show our strong commitment to improving Hungary's role in global research and innovation. Dear guests, ladies and gentlemen, as the forum's discussion showed, science and scientists and also politicians now have a bigger responsibility than ever in dealing with global challenges. I believe science is up to the task, and so we are. Thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you, Minister. And now the next agenda point is a roundtable discussion which will be moderated by Sir Peter Gluckman, President of the International Science of Council, or ISC, and the members of the panel are His Excellency Azzedine El Midawi, Minister of Higher Education, Scientific Research and Innovation of Morocco, Dr. Patricia Gruber, Science and Technology Advisor to the Secretary of State in the US Department of State, Lydia Brito, Assistant Director General, UNESCO, one of our longest-standing friends in the World Science Forum, Dr. Supit Parikh, CEO of the American Association for the Advancement of Science, or AAAS, and Mrs. Priscilla Manti, Co-Chair, Young Global Academy, or GYA. Peter, the floor is yours and your speakers.
Ministers, dear friends, Thomas and other members of the Hungarian Academy, this is the third time I've stood at this platform, and I want to congratulate the Hungarian Academy. I think the meeting this time has been absolutely focused on the issues that we thought about, namely building on the issues at the science policy interface and thinking about it in ways that look ahead and identify how we can actually continue to improve and use science to advance the human and the planetary condition. What we're going to do for the next little while is have a panel discussion on the scientific ecosystem. What's currently working? What's not working? What could we do better? What could we change? Or what's changing around us? And I think all of those are important things to reflect upon. Science is changing. The role of science in the world is changing. It's getting to be so much more critical for all the issues that are reflected in the Sustainable Development Goals and the Pact of the Futures, in national development programs. The issues that we talked about over the last 3 days is how do we embed science more effectively into decision making. And that in turn reflects on the roles of science, both discovering new knowledge, but also having it actionable knowledge that translate to actual decisions by individual citizens, by governments, or by the multilateral system. We have a panel that's got very diverse backgrounds and has a lot to think about on these issues. But if you just think about science ecosystems, They vary by context, they vary by history in different countries, and they obviously vary by economic levels of development in countries. And all of those things, so it's hard, we have to think about these issues in context as well as making sweeping statements. If you think about the scientific ecosystem, it's boundless. Obviously, it starts with government agencies, ministers, the allocation of funding for research, with the funding instruments that are used by countries with granting agencies or scientific bodies to allocate funds. It involves universities. It involves academics within the universities. It involves research institutes. It involves the scientists within research institutes. It involves increasingly start-up companies and entrepreneurs. It involves multilateral companies and big companies. It involves incubators. It's going to involve more and more the AI industry in different ways, as we saw yesterday when Xavier presented. And we're going to see and talk about the fact that science has two components: the production of knowledge and the reporting and communication of knowledge. And if you think about that, we've actually, if we look at it in the traditional model, we've actually created two industries. We have an industry of the production of knowledge, which in the eyes of many people has become a job of getting grants to keep scientists employed, and the metrics used around that are bibliometrics. And to what extent has bibliometrics affected the conduct of science in ways that are not healthy? Sir Paul Nurse, the Nobel laureate, when he spoke at an STS forum in Japan a number of years ago, says, what would happen if every scientist only had a license to publish 2 papers a year? Would we actually have improved the quality of science, reduced the volume of science? Because we're overloaded with information now that no matter what is the minimum size of your field, there's too much data, too much information. You're going to rely more and more on autonomous systems, AI, to tell you what you think you should know. And that industry, which we created, a pseudo-objective way of measuring something that's inherently subjective, how good is your science, how valuable is your science, interacts and fueled an industry called the publishing industry. And the publishing industry is a large industry in science. It's an industry which we have multiple views in this room about, so from the issues of APCs to the issues of open access to all the other issues that surround it. But the two industries are intertwined inevitably, because one depends on the other in ways that are absolutely intimate. And the production of knowledge is of no value if it's not communicated. So we need these two parts of the ecosystem, but we must be honest and say it's not working well for everybody. So how do we change that? And the other thing and so I've just hinted that I believe that AI is going to change the way knowledge is produced and the way it's communicated and analysed in ways we've never seen before. What will that do to the science system? And finally, and from my point of view, because I'm just trying to trigger our panellists to think about the future, we've seen, and the International Science Council, I think, can take credit for doing a lot of the initiative here, the increasing understanding that actionable knowledge requires transdisciplinary research. And transdisciplinary research requires another set of actors. It requires the community to be involved. It requires private sector to be involved. It requires some NGOs to be involved. It requires politicians and policymakers to be involved. It has a different time span. Current funding systems do not support transdisciplinary research well. So there's a lot of things to think about here. We should be honest. The world is a better place because of what science has done. The science systems have worked well for humanity in many ways, but we can do a lot much more, so we need to pick and identify what goes well and works well in one context and identify what we need to change and evolve so that science can be more actionable. Because I think we've heard over the last 3 days that the world needs science to be more actionable. It's one of the reasons why, helped by Saba Karosi, UNESCO and the ISC have worked together to produce a group of friends in New York on science for action, because we believe we need to make better at ensuring the knowledge we have commits to making societies a better place. So with those introductory comments, I'm going to ask first the Minister of Higher Education, Scientific Research and Innovation to come up here, of Morocco, to come up here and make his remarks, and each of the panellists will come up in turn and make his remarks in this august and magnificent spot. No university lecture theatre I've ever been in looks like this. And then we'll have a panel discussion from below. So thank you very much. Minister, please come and make your remarks.
Dear President, good morning. Your Excellency, Minister of Culture and Innovation of Hungary, Excellency Ministers, Honorable Delegates, ladies and gentlemen, it is a great honor to address you at this important gathering during this parliamentary session dedicated to the reform of science ecosystems. I would like firstly to express my sincere gratitude to the Hungarian government, the organizers, and particularly to the President of Hungarian Academy of Sciences for the kind invitation to participate in the World Science Forum 2024. The topics of today's discussion related to the science ecosystem is of critical relevance to countries around the globe, given its profound impact on economy development, competitiveness and innovation. Nations that invest in strengthening their science ecosystems not only enhance their research capabilities, but also foster cross-sectoral and cross-border collaboration, which is essential for addressing today's most pressing challenges. This investment drive sustainable growth and position countries as leaders in increasingly knowledge-based global economy. Ladies and gentlemen, under the esteemed leaders of His Majesty King Mohammed VI, may God assist him, Morocco remains firm in its commitment to nurturing the ecosystem of higher education, scientific research and innovation, with the aspiration, a hope of excellence at both the regional and African levels. The Moroccan ecosystems of higher education and research is dynamic and rapidly evolving, with a strong commitment to fostering quality in higher education, scientific advancement and innovation. Indeed, Morocco is home to a diverse network of 48 higher education institutions, including both public foundation and private universities, engineering schools, and specialized institutes. The Ministry's strategy places scientific research and innovation at the forefront of its priorities. This vision aims to empower a PhD student, establish specialized national research institutes in critical fields such as medical biotechnology, artificial intelligence, water, and strengthening partnership between universities and industry to drive progress and innovation. Honorable Assistants, I am also honored to speak today about the growing cooperation between Morocco and Hungary in the field of higher education and research. Our partnership dates back to the 70s of the last century and has flourished over the years, marked by the signing of several MOU, particularly those focused on student mobility. A key milestone in our cooperation was the MOU signed in 2021, which launched the first joint research calls between our two countries. With a budget of €2 million, we selected 6 collaborative projects addressing critical areas such as water technologies, digitalization, and the green transition. Nevertheless, challenges exist in both the Moroccan and Hungarian education and research ecosystems, particularly in aligning academic programs with industry demand, strengthening partnerships between universities and industry, further investment in human capital and research infrastructures, and connecting more sciences with societies. The future holds great promise. Through continued collaboration, investment in innovation, and strengthening ties between academia, industry, and government, both nations are poised to play a significant role in the global knowledge economy. Let us continue to work together, leveraging our strengths and addressing our challenges to build a more connected, innovative, and prosperous future. Thank you for your attentive consideration.
Will be Patricia Gruber, who's the Science and Technology Advisor to the Secretary of State of the United States Department of State. Patricia.
Good morning, and thank you, assembled dignitaries, representatives, ladies and gentlemen. It's really an honor and a pleasure for me to speak to you today, particularly in this remarkably beautiful venue. As Peter said, my name is Patricia Gruber, and I'm the Science and Technology Advisor to U.S. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken. Throughout my career, I've had the good fortune to conduct, manage, fund, and advocate for science and technology, or S&T. And so it's with conviction that I say that S&T will continue to drive the future of economic prosperity, stability, and national security around the world. A strong science foundation is the bedrock where breakthroughs in technology are achieved. Academic and research organizations have made tremendous contributions to humanity on the foundations of academic openness, collaborative ecosystems, and other shared values. However, the science ecosystem is not without its challenges. Geopolitical tensions can inhibit openness and collaboration. The increased cost of publishing and the rise of predatory journals undermine peer review. And and disadvantaged researchers in less developed countries. And of course, a decline in trust of the scientific community hinders technology adoption and can affect adversely public health and safety. In short, in this dynamic environment, science diplomacy and science policy are as important as ever. At the U.S. State Department, we engage in science diplomacy efforts to promote successful exchanges among organizations and individuals, bolster our ability to solve global challenges, and promote democratic values. We engage in high-level government-to-government, bilateral engagements, and multilateral fora such as the G7, G20, and many UN bodies. Just as the private sector increasingly drives technology investment, our public-private partnerships have also continued to grow. And we support bottom-up science diplomacy, or meaning scientific collaboration and people-to-people exchanges. For example, the Fulbright Student and Scholar Program is one of several United States cultural exchange programs and a hallmark of our work with countries around the world to share knowledge and skills, while our global innovation and through science and technology and international visitor leadership programs grow entrepreneurship and leadership skills in our partner countries. With respect to policy, our shared challenge is to balance using technology to solve societal problems, protect our citizens, and maintain a competitive posture. We all have a role in protecting and promoting academic openness and independence of scientific research to make sure that S&T can benefit society. The responsibility must be shared by governments, academia, the private sector, researchers, teachers, and civil society. Values such as transparency, reciprocity, human rights, and free exchange of ideas and intellectual property protections have become important norms in science ecosystems. But in recent years, we've seen our value systems threatened. We know certain actors who do not share our values have inappropriately acquired sensitive information, research findings, and technology. Their acquisition methods have included inducing scientists to conduct research programs on behalf of foreign governments or inappropriately disclosing non-public results from research. We've also seen unauthorized transfers of sensitive and emerging technology data, theft of intellectual property, and transnational repression of students. All of these efforts undermine the very openness that we seek to promote. These threats have also shaped how we approach research security. The United States has taken steps to de-risk our research collaborations through visa screening for international students, as well as guidelines and training for academic institutions on research security. It is important to highlight that safeguarding the integrity and transparency of research institutions is a matter of national security and a shared responsibility. Widespread information sharing among institutions and individuals can improve risk awareness and risk assessments, establish best practices, and develop peer-led resilience. Technology is evolving at an increasingly rapid pace, and in our highly connected world, the public is more engaged with the science world than ever before. Yet academics view public outreach as detracting from their career track. The science community needs to take more responsibility for communicating value and implications of its work to society in order to build trust and public support. Technology touches most aspects of our lives. For example, we are seeing tools such as AI, authentication, and provenance technologies being used to stay abreast of developments in technology, counter misinformation, and accelerate research. But we need to think about adapting our education, research, and analysis methodologies in light of these technology advances. Specifically, we need to view AI as a tool to assist people, not a replacement for them. And therefore, we need to equip students and citizens with the skills, tools, and critical thinking to use it effectively. And finally, policymakers and scientists need to be in communication regularly, not just when there's an issue. We seek to give policymakers the right information at the right time, in the right format. There's a big focus on the diplomatic side through increased tech training for foreign service officers and bringing S&T expertise into the government. For example, At the State Department, at any given time, we have more than 60 STEM fellows distributed across the department to advise us on foreign policy issues. So we need to match this in the science world with international or policy training for scientists and technical experts. I've just highlighted some challenges here. We've heard many more in the past few days, but in spite of these challenges, it is very clear that we cannot address them and make progress and contribute to society without preserving our open science ecosystem. I thank you very much for your attention.
Now to my dear friend and colleague Lydia Brito, Assistant Deputy General for Natural Sciences at UNESCO, and who's been such an important contributor to ensuring that science is truly a global endeavour.
Thank you very much, Peter. Excellencies, dear ministers, dear Thomas, again, thank you, and congratulations. It's a great pleasure to be back to this building, a long tradition of the World Science Forum. Dear colleagues, dear friends, ladies and gentlemen, over the past few days, we have highlighted the critical role of science in addressing the challenges of today and tomorrow. We have discussed the importance of building trust in science while also creating transparent, inclusive, and open systems that safeguard scientists, uphold their freedom, and support their expression. We have explored how collaborative science can bridge divides, connect people across borders, and support an ambitious agenda outlined in the United Nations Pact for the Future. This World Science Forum has once again provided a valuable opportunity to reflect on the progress made, identify key gaps that still need addressing and needs action. As we conclude, it is time to look ahead and consider the cultural shifts and systemic transformations required to make science serve all societies, leaving no one behind. Let me start with what's working. From UNESCO's perspective, we see significant strides in open science movement, making science more accessible, inclusive, and collaborative. With the unanimous adoption of the 2021 UNESCO recommendation on open science, an increasing number of countries are adopting policies that not only make research publicly available, but also expands opportunities for co-creation of knowledge and equitable sharing of its benefits. There is a growing recognition that sharing scientific outcomes is not enough. We must also democratize access to the processes and decisions that shape science, making it a global public good. And that's why the topic of this forum, science and the interface with policy, becomes so central to our discussions and future actions. In our increasingly complex world, where geopolitics and technological advances intersect, we also see a growing recognition of the need to strengthen the science policy society dialogue and use science diplomacy as a tool to tackle common challenges. Nations across the world are increasingly turning to science as the universal language that fosters dialogue, especially when traditional diplomacy falls short. But what gaps remain? Science remains unevenly produced and funded worldwide, and research infrastructures are similarly unevenly distributed. Access to scientific findings is often costly or restricted, with large portions of research available in only a few languages, even when it addresses local, regional, or global priorities. The persistent gender gap in science, combined with disparities in knowledge and technology between and within nations, limits opportunities to participate in science and to enjoy the benefits of science, undermining the human right to science. Investment in science remains insufficient in many regions, with science systems sometimes seen as competing for limited resources rather than a force to drive sustainable development and human well-being. While frameworks encourage interdisciplinary collaboration, we still need practical mechanisms, including funding instruments and incentives, to better connect scientists, policymakers, and citizens, and make scientific insights more relevant, representative, and actionable. So what can we do better? We must accelerate equity in science. This requires systemic culture changes and structural support. Policies, funding, capacity building, and incentives must prioritize equity, diversity, and inclusion in science systems globally. The push for the implementation of the 2021 UNESCO recommendation on open science and global initiatives like the International Decade of Sciences for Sustainable Development and UNESCO calls for action to close the gender gap in science are important steps in the right direction, but we must go further. We need to advance open science principles. We must embed open science principles into national science policies and funding mechanisms. Open science can be transformative, but it needs committed implementation. Through equitable partnerships and reallocation of funding from closed practices to open ones, we can empower scientists and communities everywhere to contribute and to benefit from global knowledge to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. Finally, we need to champion science diplomacy as a tool for peace. Science diplomacy must be a cornerstone of our efforts to address global challenges and promote peace. UNESCO is committed to supporting the next generation of science diplomats, equipping them to tackle common issues from water security to climate resilience. And dear Minister Anko, it was a great pleasure to be with young diplomats, science young diplomats of Hungary yesterday, and to have a chance to share and see the commitment and the vision that the Academy has and the power of young diplomats in changing our world. Looking ahead, and as we embark on the International Decade of Sciences for Sustainable Development, we have a unique opportunity to rebuild confidence in science, encourage critical thinking, and strengthening global scientific collaborations for the benefit of science, but most of all, for society. By collective actions that make science more agile, inclusive, and responsive to social needs, we can connect with those in need and position science as a tool for peaceful and sustainable development. As we move into and through the decade, the World Science Forum will remain a vital platform for assessing progress and redirecting efforts towards the most urgent next steps. Reimagining our science ecosystems requires a shared commitment to openness, equity, and collaboration. UNESCO stands ready to work with you all to ensure that indeed science serves everyone, everywhere. I thank you very much.
Our next speaker is Sudeep Parikh, who is the CEO of the American Association for the Advancement of Science, another one of the core partners of the World Science Forum.
Ministers, Excellencies, President Thomas Freund, colleagues and friends, I want to thank you for the opportunity to address this last parliamentary session. You know, I started our conversation on a couple of days ago saying that this is a golden age of science. This is an extraordinary time in human history when we know more about the universe, we know more about this planet, and we know more about ourselves than ever before. That is true. That is absolutely true. This is an extraordinary time. The pace of innovation has never been seen before. Much of that was born after the end of World War II. It was born in the mind of, in the U.S. ecosystem, was born in the mind of Vannevar Bush. Vannevar Bush was a science advisor to President Roosevelt. And his idea was that the investments in science that had taken place during the war should continue during a time of peace. His idea was that the government should invest in basic science. That basic science could then be handed out, be taken over, be translated, be scaled by industry. It's quite a simple idea, a simple vision with profound consequences. The profound consequences are building basically the foundations of our society today, building this incredible edifice of science and technology that has driven us for the last 80 years. And it's what's led to our knowing more about the universe, the planet, and ourselves. What's different today is that the structures upon which that was built are bursting at their seams. Some of the things that Sir Peter talked about in terms of bibliometrics, some of the challenges for early career scientists to get a chance to practice science while they're still young, some of the challenges of intellectual property, the changes that Vannevar Bush never imagined. Vannevar Bush never imagined a time when, in the United States, for example, $200 billion a year is invested by the federal government in science and technology. Almost $800 billion a year is invested by the private sector, industry, and philanthropy. That is a remarkable change in human history, something never seen before, and it has implications that are profound that we're not considering. We talk about AI and we imagine that we will regulate it in the way that we talk about nuclear weapons or other things. We won't. This is an extremely different time in human history. This is a moment when that infrastructure doesn't sit in governments, it sits in industry. There's no government in the world that has the GPUs, the AI data farms that are required to build large language models. No government in the world. It lives in industry. These are times that Vannevar Bush never dreamed of. And so what I would say to you is that it is time for us as a scientific community and the technical community to stop being in a defensive crouch and rather to once again become the protagonists of our own story. What does this look like? The things that got us here are not going to get us there. Those structures that Vannevar Bush developed in 1945 are irrelevant today. I just said something that is quite controversial. I think it's irrelevant today. I think that we as a generation have to be building what comes next. We have to do that. We cannot rely on the things of the past. And so as we pull together, what does that world look like? In the United States, I'm co-chairing a task force to create a new vision for American science and technology, one that takes into account these profound changes in the way that science and technology are done. We have to look to the future, not to the past. And this will look at ideas around people. Again, Vannevar Bush never imagined that a gigantic proportion of the scientists in America would be foreign-born. He never imagined it. He never imagined that infrastructure would have to be carried out in industry at a pace that it is today. He never imagined that the colors of investment would not just be federal dollars, but would be private equity, shareholders, angel investors, and philanthropies. He never saw that coming. So we have to build upon that. So I come to you and say, we can't just do this in America, we have to do it around the world. We have to do it around the world. And the World Science Forum is a great place to have that conversation if we're willing to be clear-eyed about the challenges that face us. If we are willing to say that the structures of the past are irrelevant. That's a hard thing to say. And I have a confession. I have a confession to make. When I heard that we were doing this in this grand building, I was concerned. I was concerned that perhaps we were delusional about the value of science, delusional about the idea that science can play such a role in humanity. But after being here, recognizing the history of this building, built in 1904, finished in 1904, and recognizing that it's been through wars, 2 world wars, it's been bombed, the wonderful edifice and the beautiful overlay that we see has had to be rebuilt many times, I recognize that our generation has to do that as well. But we have to do it in a way that is both clear-eyed and realistic, but also optimistic. And so when I think of what's necessary, I look at my own country, where I think there is a mood to disrupt our own institutions. Partly because we recognize that they are increasingly irrelevant. But that doesn't mean they should be destroyed. It doesn't mean they should be dismantled. It does mean they should be disrupted every now and then. And I think that as we, as a scientific community, come together, how do we do that in a way that carries our values forward, our values of openness, our values of integrity, our values of seeking to make scarcity go away? Because that's the power of science. Why do wars stop? Why does peace come? What are we arguing about? Scarcity. What can science do? Science is the ability to take what was scarce and make it limitless. On top of the Washington Monument, at the very top of the Washington Monument, is a small pyramid of aluminum. Aluminum. You might ask yourself, why? Why is it aluminum that is on top of the Washington Monument? Because at the time, it was one of the most valuable metals in the world. Why is it not today? Why is it not today? Because of science and technology, because we eliminated scarcity. How can we continue that work of moving humanity forward, creating progress, doing it in an open way, and building a future together? I'd say to you, it's by recognizing what we can and cannot do as a scientific community. We are not, I sometimes have to pinch myself, we are not the tail wagging the dog. Science is not itself going to create peace. Science itself is not going to create our hopes and dreams of what the future should be. Politics, nation states have always been here. Our 30 years of globalization are an aberration. They're an aberration from human history. Now, how do we work towards getting to those fundamental goals without tearing ourselves apart? I'd say to you that science, in this time, requires looking at where can we find values of working together? Where can an axis be formed between the U.S. and China and Europe and Asia and Africa? How do we do that? How do we find those areas to work on? We heard about several of those today, or during this meeting. Work on water, ensuring that we no longer have water as a scarcity, but as a resource. These are the kinds of things we have to work on together. This is the challenge of our time. This is not a moment for looking back on history. It's a moment for looking at how we take that history that we are the inheritors of and make it better, make it stronger, and make it more peaceful. Thank you all.
Our final panelist before we open up to discussion is Priscilla, who's going to speak on behalf as co-president of the Global Young Academy. Priscilla.
Dear colleagues, dear friends, good morning. Please allow me to stand on existing protocols that have been established and say all protocol observed. I am very grateful for the opportunity to contribute to the discussion this morning. When we talk about the definition of the effectiveness of a science ecosystem, that definition is not universal. It depends on who or what has been measured, and it also depends on how we define success. So for a young scientist like myself, the effectiveness of a science ecosystem often lies in things like opportunities for innovation, for collaboration, and then for societal impact. For the policymaker, it would probably mean scientific outputs that align with the national or global priorities. And then for society, it would mean there are tangible benefits, such as improved healthcare and climate solutions. Now, this variability underscores the importance of asking not what works, but also for whom and under what conditions. Without this clarity, the science ecosystems as we have them risk serving just a select few rather than the broader needs of humanity. Now, despite this evenness that exists, there are some clear successes in the current ecosystems which we can point to. Some successes have been achieved around dynamic innovation, global collaboration. With relation to dynamic innovation, one standout example for me is the COVID Moonshot program, which is a global open source initiative where researchers collaborated on developing antivirals during the pandemic. And by bypassing the traditional bureaucratic barriers, this approach enabled rapid innovation. And it was also a platform that gave young scientists the opportunity to contribute meaningfully, helping society achieve the expedited solutions during the global health crisis. In terms of global collaboration, I'd say that has been another area of strength for our science ecosystems. So platforms like the Global Young Academy, which connects early career researchers across disciplines, across borders, to foster knowledge sharing, to foster innovation. These platforms also provide mentorship, they provide funding opportunities, and very importantly, opportunities for high-level leadership for young researchers. Further to this, there has been the establishment of the National Young Academies, especially in the underserved regions of the world. That demonstrates how networks that are tailored to regional needs can empower researchers to not just be globally impactful, but to help address the challenges that are both immediate and locally relevant. And there are so many other successes that we can mention, some of which have been spoken about earlier by my other colleagues. But in response to the question, what is missing? I must say there's a lot that is missing. And over the last few days, we've also heard a lot that has been mentioned in the discussions. So despite all these advances, we have certain critical gaps. The science ecosystems, as we currently know them, are very far from being equitable or inclusive. We have very, very deep systemic inequities, particularly for young scientists like myself and then scientists from the Global South. Many researchers, many of us face challenges like limited funding, outdated infrastructure, which often restricts our participation in global science. So initiatives like Open Science, Open Access are excellent because they improve the knowledge sharing. However, these initiatives fail to address the deeper structural barriers, such as the technological divide or resource disparities. There are a lot of international programs that those of us in the Global South benefit from, which often aim to build capacity. And they would often invite young scientists from underserved regions to attend workshops or conferences abroad. However, these opportunities frequently neglect to provide the follow-up support. So a researcher may undertake this opportunity, return inspired, and even very well equipped with new techniques, but yet still will have to face the overwhelming challenge of applying them due to a lack of local infrastructure or even institutional support. This disconnect between opportunity and then sustainable impact prevents the translation of individual potential into systemic change. There are also barriers fueled by ranking systems, like my earlier colleagues have mentioned. We have academic and funding systems that disproportionately favor senior scientists. This stifles creativity, especially in areas where we need fresh perspectives. The current over-reliance on bibliometric indicators just simply reinforces the structural inequities and then limits the broader relevance of research. The system simply rewards incremental and redundant research rather than transformative science. And additionally, it further marginalizes researchers from the Global South because we undoubtedly lack access to these high-profile collaborations or even well-funded institutions that tend to dominate these prestigious journal publications. Another missing piece is representation. So young scientists, and then scientists particularly from the Global South, tend to be underrepresented at decision-making tables. There seems to be this very great emphasis on enhancing composition of such decision-making bodies, rather than fostering the meaningful participation of young scientists. This again perpetuates a cycle where the well-promoted strategies fails to reflect the diverse perspectives and priorities. There are also issues with transparency and accountability. For instance, in the peer review system, in the funding system, and this further undermines the trust in the science systems. Very often, I say that we talk about the mistrust between scientists and policymakers, and then between science and society. But we seem to speak very little about the mistrust within the science ecosystem itself. So there are a lot of divides that exist. There are divides that exist between disciplines, between generations of scientists, and even between world regions. And this often hinders the collaboration and progress which we talk about. It's not enough for us to just tout jargons like transdisciplinary research and collaboration without addressing the underlying tensions and structural barriers that prevent these meaningful interactions. Similarly, there are also barriers to advocacy. Academic institutions frequently undervalue advocacy, and then that discourages young scientists from engaging with societal challenges. And combined with a growing public mistrust of science, these barriers limit researchers' ability to make meaningful societal impacts. So to the question, how can we do it better? I'd like to add my voice to Lydia's and say we need to build equity into the science system. It's important for us to ensure that these diversity metrics, which we keep talking about, go beyond the surface level representation and on to measuring participation and influence in decision making. I was recently asked to quantify how much impact I have made based on the science diplomacy work I've done in the last few years. And I must say, I really struggled. There must be some inclusive policies that actually address barriers that prevent marginalized groups like the young scientists, women, researchers from the global south from having meaningful roles in shaping research priorities and then institutional strategies. Also, I think it's important for science advocacy to be recognized as an integral part of a scientific career. Institutions can offer fellowships and funding for advocacy and public engagement, ensuring that researchers, especially the young researchers, have the time and the resources to communicate our work effectively. Also, in as much as international support for science is needed in the global south, I think it's important to mention the critical solution that is needed in terms of governments of countries in the global south taking an active role in supporting scientific advancements. So by learning from the successes of the success stories from other regions with comparable constraints, like India, who have demonstrated how targeted investments in national research funding can drive innovation and elevate local scientists on the global stage. These countries can help to provide long-term sustainable support for researchers in their country. Also, academic and funding systems require urgent reform, like has been mentioned. And to address this, things like the evaluation criteria or how we measure success in science should be redefined so that we prioritize social relevance and the broader impact of research. So in conclusion, I'd like to say that trust in science, I believe, must begin with trust within the science ecosystem. And this is going to require us to address divides that exist between disciplines, generations of scientists, as well as regions of the world. We should endeavor to foster open communication, mutual respect, and transparency within the ecosystem. And by creating an inclusive and supportive environment within the scientific community, I think we can model the kind of trust which we seek to build with the policymakers as well as society. Only then can we, or can science truly fulfill its potential as a driver of progress and equity, and thus supporting the UN's Pact for the Future. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Priscilla. We've had some interesting, or 6 interesting presentations which challenge us in different ways. There's the issues that Sadiq particularly raised, that the system is actually at the point where the past structures may no longer serve our future. We've got the issues that many of you have raised, that the geography of science is changing. It's no longer just a global north enterprise. The demography of science is changing, with far more commitment to women, to people of diversity in different ways to be involved. It's also the scope of science is changing, with, I think, a lot more integration of social and natural sciences. But on the other hand, most of the people in this room are academics. And you have to say that the academic community is as a collective, is remarkably conservative. We're not seeing change. We all know there are problems with bibliometrics. We all know there are problems with research assessment, but we continue to use it all the time. And at the end of the day, we're all human. We all respond to incentives that are in place. And so there's a fundamental problem. I think, how do we change the incentives in the system, whether it's in the global north, as Sadiq suggested, or in the way that some too many countries in the global south might be replicating the mistakes of the global north, and we actually find new ways of doing it. It's hard, because as I said, I think the academic community is remarkably conservative when it's looked at in a structural sense, as opposed to individual members of the community. And then we have the other issue that's now that is clear, and it's always been there. And you raised Vannevar Bush and his great impact on most countries. Countries see, quite properly, and the minister from Morocco raised it, the issues of commercialisation, economic growth. But let's also recognise the importance of social science, social development, cultural development, all those elements that come together. And it's certainly in many countries, and like in the US, Sudeep, I'm chairing in New Zealand a review of our science system. And again, the political pressure is all about the narrow economic lens, not the broader lens. How do you come back? And then Patricia raised the issue which is real, and we can't duck from it, that at the last two ministerial meetings, the EU ministerial meeting in February in Brussels, where there were 60 ministers present from well beyond the EU on international science cooperation, and then at the OECD ministerial meeting, where there was similarly about the same number, the mantra, open as possible, closed as necessary, became quoted by virtually every minister in the room. Is that going to be an excuse if the security issues get too broad, that open science will actually become threatened? And we need to find a way, because every country needs to look after its security, it needs to look after its physical, its security of all its assets. It's understandable that science, technology, economics and security are now more intertwined than they've ever been before in history. They've always been intertwined, but more so now. So there's some really careful discussions needed to make sure that the understandable responsibility of every government to maintain itself, its assets secure, doesn't lead to a compromising of open science. And that's going to be a hard thing to achieve. So I'm not trying to summarise, but I'm trying to identify, and I'm going to go around each of the panellists in turn and ask them, they've heard from the other panellists now, what has triggered in their mind to think a little bit about where the emphasis might be if we really need to shift the needle? How do we shift the needle a bit further? Lydia, would you like to start?
Thank you. And then you will complain that I have said everything you wanted to say, but that's okay. Thank you very much. First of all, thank you to all the panelists and Excellency. I didn't want to mention, but of course next week we will have the Open Science Arab Regional Forum in Rabat. So thank you very much for the support. And again, Peter, as you mentioned, the open science environment and the policies that need to be in place are a key aspect that I think many of you mentioned, because it's also about inclusion, equity, transparency, fairness, not only on the benefits, but also of producing knowledge. I think the right to be part of knowledge production is a human right, and the framework of open science helps that. The other point that was coming in and out, not only today, but throughout the 3 days of the forum, it's the social contract with science. And I think this is a point, and you talk about changing and not looking at the past structures. I would say that there are systemic transformations that are needed in this social contract with science. Because before, and we still use that contract, was with society and science through governments, and the expression was mostly through capacity building, funding for universities, for research, etc. Today we have other actors. We have other actors, not only in science, but also on that social contract. So one aspect that I would put forward that we continue after Budapest to the next forum to say what is that new social contract with science, and how, by understanding those forces and including all those stakeholders that today are somehow out of our debate and they are even out of our forum, can we then build trust in science? How can we make sure that the interface between science, policy, and society becomes adapted to the situation we are living? And Ambassador Korosi, you keep saying science is for transformation, but for humanity and planet, it's not abstract. So how can we make sure that that social contract, that new understanding of that contract will allow us to be and do more actionable research and more impactful research and more inclusive research? Thank you.
Thank you, Lydia. Minister, would you like to make some comments?
I have anything to add about. We are agree. But the big question now in the world that the technologies and sciences, the hard sciences, progress quickly, more quickly than we can imagine. But for this, I want to put the point on the human science. They don't grow. And I think that will have in the future big disequilibriums in our society regarding many things, individual or all the society. For I think it is very, very necessary for all the world science forums to put the really place of human science, psychology, philosophy, art, sociology, and other things. We look today many phenomena in our societies. The technology progresses quickly. It's a good thing, but it is necessary to have big attention to human sciences. It's not a lux. It's not a fast human sciences. It's very, very important. Despite I am a physical chemicals, I am in hard sciences.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, if we just look at the existential threats ahead, beyond the obvious ones, the issues of mental health for young people are now clearly a global issue of epidemic proportions. The issues of breakdown in social cohesion, the issues of how society adjusts to technologies such as AI, and we've seen what social media has done to a whole lot of societal discourse. The issues we already should have learned from the GM history that when physical sciences get ahead of the social sciences, we can have issues in how to use technology as well. So I agree with you, Minister, that you've raised a very important point. Patricia, you put the hard issues on the table, and they are hard. I mean, there's no doubt about that. But I think we have to be optimistic and think, how do we work through that to make it into, how do we get beyond the immediacy of inherent geostrategic tensions in a multipolar world? And how do we actually use science harmoniously to make the world, to get beyond those barriers?
Sure. So let me just make a comment on how we think about research security in the U.S. So what we've done is we've put together tools and training to allow universities to assess the risk of collaboration. We are not trying to stop collaboration. And we'll never eliminate all risk. We know that. But it's about at least going into, and sometimes you want to take a risk because the benefit of a collaboration is much greater than any risk that you're going to take. So we're basically just trying to create the tools to allow our science ecosystem to at least, understand and be aware of what's going on. And it's really, and it's interesting because the fundamentals of it are, disclosure of your funding sources, disclosure of who you partner with, highlight any potential conflicts of interest or undue influence by governments. And I would argue that these same sort of values of transparency are really underpinning of research integrity, which is what we've kind of been looking for all along. So I don't think that they're in conflict. To your question about what we need to change or how do we move ahead, how do we look forward, you said it, it's incentives. I think we really need to think about how do we reward our academics. You know, maybe rather than counting the number of publications, it's how much public outreach have we done as far as the social, how have we engaged with the social contract? You know, what has been the societal impact of the work that we've done? And I think as a community, we need to make sure that we focus on those big issues, right? I think there were some interesting discussions about how to assess where we are on our progress in SDGs. And maybe we should think about how we incorporate that into our reward system. Thank you.
One of the issues that the International Science Council we spend a lot of time worrying about is particularly the mobility of young scientists. That young scientists often have difficulty, takes months to get a Schengen visa to come to Europe, to come to a meeting like this. Too often we see at the last minute young scientists who need to come to a meeting to build relationships, to meet people who they might be trained for. And so while I don't have the solutions, I do believe that the global science policy community needs to think how we could address the issue for young emerging scientists so that they could travel easier to meet, go to meetings and interface and meet a person who they might do a fellowship with or whatever. So it's an issue that we're looking at, don't have the solutions yet, but we're looking at what some of you may know about is in the Asia Pacific region, there's the APEC business card, which allows visa-free travel for validated people between countries as a way to actually try and accelerate for scientists a way of moving. Obviously, that allows the countries to screen and decide. But things like that, are there new tools we can do to promote scientific mobility? Because at the end of the day, the issues we've heard that the global north, global south divide here are about mobility, particularly for young people, so that we can build a future in science. Sudeep, you perhaps gave the most provocative talk, and I've written down, because I like it, Vannevar Bush's structures are relevant. I think that might have to become the title of my report to the Prime Minister of New Zealand too, because you're right, we do need to think about structures. We do need to think about the reality that not just in your country, but, well, 30% of basic science, discovery science, is now done in the private sector. And if we think about, particularly in the digital and related and life sciences spaces, far more, it's a disproportionately high level. So there's big changes ahead. If you had a magic wand, what would be the first things you would try and deal with to get change? And given the reality that you're one of the major superpowers in science in the world, it will influence what other countries do. So what would you suggest are the kinds of changes that we should make?
I'm fortunate in that I'm surrounded in this task force by 80 people who are from industry, from academia, graduate students, all the way to CEOs. And so their ideas are, what I'm about to tell you are things that are coming from there, not from me. I'll give you two examples. The first is, how do you get infrastructure? So in the past, after World War II, infrastructure sat in the United States in national laboratories. Right? That's where we built synchrotrons and ignition facilities and those sorts of things. And because it was considered that was the most expensive pieces of hardware in the world. They should be at national laboratories. Today, there's a supercomputer at Oak Ridge National Laboratory that's quite fast. It's got nothing to do with AI. And frankly, if you wanted to run an LLM, you would never run it on that supercomputer. You'd run it where? At Microsoft, at OpenAI, or for that matter, Tesla. And that infrastructure is not going to be built by the U.S. federal government. It's not going to be built by Europe. It's not going to be built by any nation state. It's not going to be. And so how do you build that type of infrastructure in a way that can be used by scientists not just at Harvard and MIT, but also in the United States, the University of North Carolina or the University of Arkansas, but also in in our parlance, the Global South or somewhere else around the world. How do you do that? It requires governance models that are contributed to by governments, but not controlled by governments. It requires governance models that take into account that these companies are acting like nation states of their own. And we have to have that realistic, clear-eyed view of the world today, as opposed to thinking that that these are national champions in some way. They're not. And so creating shared governance that also comes from philanthropy. There are gigantic philanthropies now in the United States, and they're going to grow around the world as the transfer of wealth happens from this current generation to the next. We have to make sure that we're taking all of this and using them together in a shared governance. That has risk. How do you mitigate that risk? How do you move forward? Those are the kinds of questions we have to be asking. And if we don't ask them, frankly, the world will move on without us. The world will move on without us, because the second area is about early career scientists. We're talking about bibliometrics and how are we going to value each other. I got to tell you, the 25-year-olds I know, they don't care about what we're talking about, right? I'm the executive publisher of Science. I love the fact that there's a magazine, a paper magazine. I can tell you that if you read a paper magazine, I know exactly how old you are. I know exactly how old you are. And if you are coming in through PubMed or some other way, I know exactly how old you are. And if you're coming in through a social media channel, I know how old you are. And I know that they are having discussions about papers in a way that you and I don't. And that's extraordinary. It's fascinating. It's changing the world all at once. And if we're not part of creating the new systems, then they're going to be chaotic, they're going to be inefficient, and they're not going to be as good as they could be for progressing the planet forward.
Priscilla, you stimulate a lot of thinking around this panel and the audience, I think. Is there anything you'd like to say as your final thoughts?
So I just would like to add my thoughts to the question or the statement you made about scientists being conservative, yes, and not being open to change. I was thinking about why that is. A lot of the time we complain about these very big science publishers like Nature and all of that and perpetuating the inequalities. But as a young scientist, when you come in, one of the things that is drowned into your head is that you need to get a Nature paper. And so you work your whole life trying to get into Nature. And I'd say the only reason why we are very conservative is that the movers and shakers of science are benefiting from the inequalities or the problems that exist. Hence, the inability to overcome inertia. So again, relooking at how we reward success or we define impact in science has to be significantly disrupted. We talk about these bibliometrics, for instance, and the system and the way it's designed simply just keeps you along those lines. So why don't we start thinking about more disruptive ways of doing things? I was recently having a conversation with a friend who was talking about an idea of dynamic publishing models. So instead of you having, for instance, static publications, which everybody publishes and puts their name on it, why don't we have a dynamic paper, which changes as people contribute to the research? So it's essentially a living document, things like that. We talk about the funding systems not being designed towards supporting transdisciplinary research, but really our reward systems do not reward transdisciplinary research. So why don't we think about issues like sabbaticals? If I go on a sabbatical from my university, I'm expected to do something that is related to what I was doing in my university. Otherwise, I don't get paid. Why don't we think around maybe compulsory sabbaticals where when you leave, wherever you go to, you are forced to work in a different discipline? That will open up your mind to other disciplines and make us more receptive towards other disciplines. So I think we need to be a little more disruptive and not be fixed in the boxes in which we have been brought up.
We could go on, and we don't have time, and I'm sure I'll be shot at about 1 minute if I'm not careful to stop. But I just want to finish with something that Lydia and I have worked together on over the last year, which is thinking about what can we achieve with the International Decade for Science for Sustainability. Now, we can all get cynical about international decades, but it is an opportunity because we've talked here about 2 dimensions, and Lydia and I have been talking about 2 dimensions and thinking about the decade. The first is that the science looks at itself, and we actually do make some serious commitments to what kinds of changes are needed in the science system. And we've had some interesting discussions here which starts the discussion. The second is how science relates to society and to policy. What do we need to change? What we need to do there? And if you think about that, if we could use the decade to focus on those 2 questions, and Thomas, we use the forum to actually check on progress along that, along with the meetings that UNESCO runs and the International Science Council runs. Perhaps when we look back at this and we come back here, perhaps in 8 years' time, Thomas, if I'm doing my calculations right, the 2 forums from here, 2 Hungarian forums from here, then we can see that we've actually shifted from just talking about change to making change both within the science system and in the way the science system relates. Now, let's not be utopian, let's not pretend it's easy, but let's also remember that the point that was made about Vannevar Bush's structures are no longer relevant is not just about America, it's actually a global statement that science has to change and science systems have to change. So thank you very much. I think at this point I turn back to you.
Thank you, panelists, for this excellent panel. And ladies and gentlemen, now we'll continue with a brief coffee break. We will convene again at 11:30 here in this room. And it is my understanding that during the coffee break, we will share with you the consolidated text of the declaration, which will be informed about in more detail during the coming session at 11:30. Thank you. Please take your seats. Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. Ladies and gentlemen, we have arrived at the last closing session of the 11th World Science Forum, and I would like to call to the podium Professor Tamás Freund, President of the Hungarian Academy of Sciences, who will share with you the consolidated final text of the Declaration of the World Science Forum.
Ladies and gentlemen, the draft of the declaration has been sent around. You all had a chance to look at it and send us your suggestions of changes or additions. And we spent over an hour yesterday evening by the steering committee trying to include as many of your recommendations as possible without introducing too much redundancy. I cannot list you all of these changes, but I would like to mention a few areas where we have made changes according to your recommendations. Protection of science and scientists in times of armed conflicts. Involvement of young scientists. Importance of methodologies to measure the sustainability transition. Mention of science journalism and science diplomacy as important tools to promote trust in science. These were the most important changes which we incorporated according to your suggestions, and I hope that you will find the final version satisfactory for all of you. According to our traditions, although you have it in front of you, I have to read it up and ask for your forgiveness for my English pronunciation. Preamble. Driven by the initiative and commitment of the three founding organizations of the World Science Forum, the United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization, UNESCO, the International Science Council, ISC, and the Hungarian Academy of Sciences, and together with the WSF partner organizations, the American Association for the Advancement of Science, AAAS, the World Academy of Sciences, TWAS, the Inter-Academy Partnership, IAP, and the European Academy Science Advisory Council, ESAC, we, the participants of the 11th World Science Forum, held from 20 till 23rd of November 2024 in Budapest, adopt the present declaration. The science and policy interface at a time of global transformations. Our world is undergoing rapid transformation and faces an uncertain future. Extraordinary scientific and technological advances are at odds with insufficient progress on addressing the challenges of climate change and most of the sustainable developmental goals, and growing number of armed conflicts, rising inequalities and the emergence of rapidly evolving disruptive technologies. We urgently need to broaden scientific understanding and to promote science-informed, adaptive and long-term thinking and decision-making. Efficient, trusted and creative science and policy interfaces are always critical, but never more so than at this time of global transformations. Science as a universal language is the evidence-based tool for understanding our world and its future. It should guide society, policymakers, and the economy on risk, opportunities, and choices. To remain effective, science must be open and must evolve and engage with other human endeavors to support sustainable progress without undermining evidence-based solutions. We must uphold the right to science while recognizing and addressing the limits of science and its potential to do harm when scientific knowledge is misused. We note this particularly with regard to armed conflict. We recognize the evolving role of science diplomacy in bringing together science and policy to address these challenges and promote science for peace. While we recognize the challenges to evidence-based policy making, we note the increasing risks posed by disinformation and other actions that undermine vital trust in science. We note with regret that distrust and outright denial of science have been incorporated into some political and social agendas. We must confront the danger posed by these phenomena and strive to counteract potential impediments to our capacity to address challenges to a global commons. We affirm the universality of science while recognizing that its impact will be limited unless the benefits of its advancement and its applications are equitably shared. We support the implementation of integrated methodologies that are applicable to all countries for measuring sustainability transitions as presented at WSF 2024. We encourage the international science community to contribute to consolidating these methodologies to help meet the Sustainable Development Goals and support sustainable information and well-being in our societies. In this context, leaders and representatives of the global science and science policy communities met in Budapest for the 11th World Science Forum on 23rd November 2024. The theme of the forum was the science and policy interface at a time of global transformations, a response to the 2024 UN Pact for the Future and Agenda 2030 for Sustainable Development. The participants of the forum agreed to the following. We acknowledge the crucial role of science, technology and innovation in tackling urgent global crises through the interface of science with policymakers in order to provide options for solutions to local, community, national and regional challenges. We note that science is too often downplayed or ignored by policymakers, business leaders and civil society when considering the future of our societies and the planet. We warn of the dangers posed by the intentional undermining of trust in science. We note that science must earn trust through integrity and effective and context-appropriate communication. We note that the global science community must commit fully to shared values and principles, including academic and scientific freedom, scientific excellence, openness and transparency, reciprocity and accountability, ethical compliance and integrity, as well as ensuring diversity, equity, inclusion and accessibility in the production and publication of knowledge. We know that science education is of critical importance to empower and inform societies. We note that science has a critical role in evidence-based policy making across sectors through whole of government and whole of society approaches. The members of the forum thereby call for the strengthening of both whole of government and within agency science advice mechanisms, including those in finance and foreign ministries that in many nations and in parts of the multilateral system are underdeveloped or absent. Call on governments of nations at all levels of development to ensure that knowledge production and translation is supported as a vital component of national development and well-being. Academic and scientific freedom must be enabled, respected and sustained, science kept as open and inclusive as possible, and science and scientific researchers protected. Call on governments and other actors in times of conflict to protect scientists and science ecosystems. Call for the strengthening of national education systems and their science education practices to promote an understanding of the scientific process and the need for critical thinking. Call on the scientific community to redouble efforts to ensure the production of trusted knowledge and pragmatic solutions, and to eliminate harmful scientific practices in both the production and reporting of knowledge. Call on all stakeholders to foster the participation of early career researchers in science policy dialogues. Call on the scientific community to ensure better communication of science's potential to inform and also of its limitations to both civil society and decision makers. These activities should be acknowledged by the science community as a key aspect of its mission, while science journalism should be nurtured and protected. Call for greater integration of efforts to use and protect science within the multilateral system and through its components, particularly as it interfaces with the global scientific community through its formal structures, including those related to science diplomacy. Call on the international community to engage in the International Decade of Sciences for Sustainable Development and foster equitable science for all. Call on governments, organizations, and businesses to subject scientific developments and new and emerging technologies to ethical standards. We welcome further dialogue with other international organizations and stakeholders in addressing the issues highlighted in this declaration. So that's it. And now we have to vote for it. So please, all those who are in support of this declaration, please raise your hands. Thank you. Anyone against it? Thank you. So it's an unequivocal decision on the declaration. Thank you very much.
Now, as the final part of this session, the next part of the closing session is the announcement of the host of World Science Forum 2026, followed by the handover ceremony and the closing remarks. Mr. President, the word is yours.
Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear participants of the 11th World Science Forum, as you are surely aware of that by now, the World Science Forum is organized biennially and in alternance between Budapest and the emerging poles of science to highlight and emphasize its global nature. After the enthralling conferences in Brazil, Jordan, and South Africa, covering 3 continents, the steering committee of WSF was once again tasked with the tough job to select the next host of the forum. Following a few rounds of negotiations with several potential applicants, finally we received 2 amazing applications that satisfied all the criteria we had in mind, including, above all, respect for the core values of WSF and the obligation to cover the costs that come with a conference of this magnitude. Let me begin by announcing the wonderful application which in the end came second. Please join me in acknowledging the Turkish Academy of Sciences for their true commitment and for having submitted a great bid to host the 2026 World Science Forum. Congratulations for your excellent work and our warmest appreciation to you. May I ask the representatives of the Turkish Academy of Sciences to stand up, please. Please. And encourage you to submit the bid again for the next one. And now, without any further ado, it is my utmost pleasure to announce the next host of our conference series. The winning application selected by the steering committee to host the World Science Forum in 2026 was submitted by Indonesia. Congratulations to the National Research and Innovation Council of Indonesia for making such an elaborate and most impressive proposal that will allow the forum to draw the attention of the science and policy community to the Eastern Hemisphere. I am very excited about and already very much looking forward to our next summit in Jakarta. But there is no need for me to say more about WSF 2026 when we have the privilege to welcome among us the Executive Secretary of BRIN, the National Research and Innovation Council of Indonesia, Dr. Nur Suestining Tias. Before giving her the podium and ask her to address the audience, allow me one last remark. As you take over the humbling and many cases rather overwhelming task and responsibility to continue the tradition of WSF Fora and maintain its appeal, please rest assured of our sustained support to you in your future efforts. The Hungarian Academy of Sciences and all WSF organizations will stand by you and support you in creating the most successful World Science Forum in 2026. Once again, congratulations to you, Dr. Suestining Tias. The floor is yours.
Honorable President of Hungarian Academy of Science, Professor Tamás Friend, Honorable President of Academy of Science all over the world, Professor Lydia Brito, the Director General for Natural Sciences UNESCO, Professor Balázs Gulyás, President of the Hungarian Research Network, Professor Peter Gluckman, President of International Science Council, and Dr. Sudip Parikh from CEO American Association for the Advancement of Science. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, truly I also apologize if I have not good pronunciation. On behalf of the National Research and Innovation Agency, BRIN, of the Republic of Indonesia, please allow me to deliver our acknowledgements to Professor Tamás Friend, President of the Hungarian Academy of Science, as the chair of the World Science Forum 2024, who is really greatly success and congratulations. Thank you also for the invitation for Indonesia delegation. I would like also to take this opportunity to express our gratitude to the steering committee for the trust in selecting Indonesia, to the organizing committee, as well as to all partners organizations of the World Science Forum 2024. This forum has been successfully in assembling scientists, policymakers, industry leaders, civil society, and the media to discuss the role of science, the role of trust in science, and the role of science diplomacy and others in mitigating and providing solutions to the global challenge. I believe everybody and also Indonesia delegation are feeling satisfied with the rich and valuable context in its interactive session of the World Science Forum 2024, which are related to current topics and emerging issues in science and sustainable development. The forum is also furnished with beautiful and historical venues of Budapest that will be cherished in mind coming back to our home countries, including the declaration this afternoon. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it is an honor for Indonesia, especially National Research Innovation Agency, to accept this handover as the next host of the World Science Forum 2026. Indonesia is archipelagic and one of mega biodiversity country in the world. We propose the theme Science for Global Resilience and Equity for 2026 World Science Forum. Indonesia is also currently in the transformation era. We are active in G20 Research and Innovation Working Group, in Science 20, and also Global Research Councils and many in multilateral platforms. Being host World Science Forum in 2026, I believe it will motivate our beloved scientists, policymakers, and increase Indonesia's scientific community to actively more engage, more collaborate, and more contribute to the global scientific community to World Science Forum. Finally, please allow me to present the video message of the Chairman of the National Research and Innovation Agency, BRIN, of the Republic Indonesia, just was taken yesterday during his visit in the region area.
Warmest greetings from Jakarta and good afternoon to all of you. It is such an immense pleasure for me to greet you all at this very special event. I hope we are all in a good health. First and foremost, kindly accept our highest appreciation to the Hungarian Academy of Science for your notable contribution on science, also for the successful organization of the 11th World Science Forum 2024. Congratulations. We highly appreciate this forum as a respected international platform with equal participation, a broad agenda of humanitarian issues including global peace and security, achieving sustainable development through science. In addition to this, it is an honor and a privilege for me, on behalf of the government of Indonesia, to accept this precious opportunity to host the 12th World Science Forum in 2026. We acknowledge and concern that the two last editions of WSF address the global transformation challenges, equality in science, and the efficiency of policy in science. By recognizing the importance of the issue and sustaining our discussion and action, therefore, in this very particular moment, we would like to state that Indonesia is ready to host the WSF 2026 with the theme of Science for Global Resilience and Equity. We look forward to welcome you all of you, to our wonderful land, Indonesia. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you very much. Thank you, and I hope to see you all again in Jakarta, Indonesia 2026. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, now we arrived at the closing remarks, and I would like to ask Mrs. Lydia Brito, Assistant Director General for Natural Sciences, UNESCO, to share with us her final closing remarks.
I promise I don't speak more. You are probably tired of having me. But first of all, congratulations, Indonesia. So, it's always a great pleasure when we have a new country hosting the next forum and all the excitement. And of course, Thomas, I'm sure you and your team will be sleeping so well tonight. But thank you for the long nights and long weekends to make this 24 World Science Forum so wonderful. So, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, colleagues, on behalf of UNESCO and our Director General, Madame Audrey Azoulay, that sent regrets that she could not be with us today. I would like to thank you all for coming to this 11th edition of the World Science Forum and sharing your time, ideas, suggestions, and I would say aspirations with all of us. I would like to express my deepest gratitude to the government of Hungary and the Hungarian Academy of Sciences for their unwavering support for the World Science Forum and for its wonderful, warm hospitality. Thank you again, and a round of applause to Thomas and all the colleagues. The atmosphere created here has truly underscored Hungarians' commitment to make this forum not only a platform for scientific exchange, but also a celebration of shared values, rich culture, and lasting friendships. The World Science Forum has long been a beacon for advancing science for the benefit of humanity, and the efforts of the government of Hungary and of the Science Academy in hosting this event have been vital to ensure that this continues to be the case every 2 years. So even when it moves to another country, the Hungarian Academy of Sciences supports the Secretariat. And Giga, thank you so very much to you and your team for very hard work. And you always smile. If there is something I like about you is that you are in the worst crisis, you have a smile and you say it's going to work. So thanks for that wonderful capacity to really organize, but also putting us in line so that we can indeed carry this forum in a wonderful way. As this forum concludes, I am even more convinced of the critical role that science has to play in improving our lives today and tomorrow. But to unlock the full potential of science in our turbulent times and unpredictable environments, a new social contract for science must be built to strengthen trust in science and foster mutually beneficial collaboration between scientists, policymakers, industry, and most of all, societies. I echo the voices of many who have spoken here. The global challenges we face are immense, but they are not insurmountable. Together as scientists, policymakers, business, and citizens, we have the capacity, and I would say the duty, to craft solutions that will stand the test of time. As we leave Budapest, let us remember that science is not an isolated endeavor. It is embedded in the fabric of humanity, shaped by our collective experiences and responsibilities. Let us live inspired and resolved, ready to transform our shared vision into action. Thank you for your contributions, your passion, and your belief in the power of science to drive change. I wish you all safe travels, continued success in your endeavors, and calls and emails so that we can follow on the declaration of this 2024 forum, and in 2026 we will have so much more to share. So I'm looking forward to see you all in Indonesia in 2026, but much before, in doing what we are supposed to do, implement the goals that we put in this important declaration. I thank you all.
Thank you, Lydia. And now, last but not least, allow me to ask Professor Tamás Freund, President of the Hungarian Academy of Sciences, to give the final address of the 2024 World Science Forum.
Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, colleagues, we have indeed come to the end of an extremely substantive program of inspiring and insightful debates, formal and informal discussions, condensed into as many as 50 events, spanning 4 long and exhaustive days. I would also like to believe that the forum facilitated quite a few concrete actions, a number of bilateral negotiations, announcement of joint actions and international collaborations. Without trying to take stock of all these, let me mention 2 examples. Those, in fact, were mentioned already by Sudeep. The Earth Water Future Initiative, a global scientific project to mitigate the looming water crisis, and the announcement of joint US-China research project addressing key challenges in the fields of human health and food security. And I'm sure the list could go on. At this very end of the conference, only one important task remains to me as the chair of the forum, to express my heartfelt gratitude to the excellent speakers and moderators of the forum and its participants from 122 countries who devoted their time to come to Budapest, contributed to the program of the 2024 World Science Forum. Your enthusiasm and expertise were certainly the driving force behind the event. The motivation that has brought us together once again in Budapest, and the main reason why we will all be glad to travel to Indonesia in 2026. Well, apart from its lovely people and fascinating culture and delicious food, not to come to think of it. I would also like to thank the founding and partner organizations of WSF, UNESCO, ISC, AAAS, IAP2S and ESAC for their unwavering support for the success of this series in general and for their inestimable contribution to WSF 2024 in particular. And of course, I owe thanks to all those national and international organizations and their representatives whose sessions and events complemented our main program, making it so much richer and more diverse. And last but not least, I must thank the delivery team of WSF 2024 for making this forum happen. It is not an easy task to coordinate so many activities and meet so many requests, especially for a small team like ours in the Hungarian Academy of Sciences. Alas, it would take too long to acknowledge them one by one, but let me especially thank the always smiling Gergely Böhm, head of my presidential office, and Katalin Fodor, head of the Academy's International Relations Department. And her colleagues, Ildikó Bíró from the Organization Department and Judith Pető-Szirmai, Assistant for International Affairs, for their many sleepless nights. I think they also deserve a round of applause, just like other members of the team. Thank you for having been here with us. Do cherish the messages of the forum and have a safe trip home. I hereby declare the 11th World Science Forum closed. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President. With this, the mission of the 2024 World Science Forum is completed. Please enjoy the farewell reception outside this ceremonial hall. Thank you so much, and see you in Jakarta 2026.